Welcome to Chautauqua People. My guest today is Cathy Nowosielski, who is both an internist and a chaplain. She grew up in Michigan and attended Catholic elementary schools and a public high school. She's a product of the 6-year combined undergraduate medical school program at the University of Michigan and a residency in internal medicine at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit, after which she practiced medicine with her father. Subsequently, she was a full-time mother when her children were small, attended Sacred Heart Seminary in their clinical pastoral program, and served a chaplaincy internship and residency. She's had extended periods of service as a staff internist at Henry Ford Hospital and chaplain at Beaumont Hospital in Michigan. She has an extensive record of community service, including a 3-year tour leading the Chautauqua Annual Fund. Cathy, how did you make your way to Chautauqua?
About 23 years ago, I took a friend up on a invitation. I had worked with her in a service capacity a couple years before, and every time I turned around, she was saying, "Oh, wherever my husband takes me is my house. Chautauqua is my home." And I thought she was so passionate about this because it didn't happen once a day. Sometimes it was more than once a day when she got exasperated with what was going on. So I said, "Please tell me about Chautauqua." And eventually I figured out it might be a place I'd like to visit. A year later, circumstantially, I was passing through from Cape Cod to Michigan and called her up and said, "Did you really mean it? I have 2 kids in the car and we're going to make it if you will have us." It took one walk down the brick walk past the Episcopal Chapel over Thunder Bridge. When I arrived, it was 9 o'clock. When we got to the amphitheater, twinkle lights were on, it was drizzling, the symphony was playing, and I turned to her and said, "I'll be back." She told me I wouldn't, that I was nuts. I hadn't seen it during the day, and the rest was history. I have been back every summer since, and took a little longer to get my husband on board with the potential for this being a fuller time place, especially in retirement. But we've been retired 3 years here. We spend almost 6 months on the grounds and 6 months in Florida, which is our permanent residence now.
And it's a good life, isn't it?
We are very blessed. It's a wonderful life.
And where have you lived on the grounds?
I'd say everywhere. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but I have lived everywhere from the south end to the north end, touching fences on both ends. I have stayed in every type of facility, private homes, condos, including the 3rd floor walk up at the arcade with the spiral staircase to the bedroom on top. In the early days, it was whatever you could find for the next summer.
Right.
And there was a bit of a panic a couple years when I didn't think I'd get to Chautauqua. It meant that much to me.
How did the kids respond to all of this?
They love Chautauqua deeply now, but in the beginning they were middle school, and I'd send them to club because I heard about this wonderful club, and that left me free to get involved, to do some things. And then after a year or so, they fessed up and said, "You know how you send us down the hill? Well, we go down the hill, but we don't necessarily go to club." It took a little longer for them to break in. But as adults, they both are passionate about history like their father. They love golf. You find your niche at Chautauqua.
You do.
And they have definitely found it. I have one son who comes in from Detroit pretty much every weekend when we're here.
And how long a trip is that?
4.5, 5 hours, depending on who's driving.
That's not bad. It's not bad at all.
No, not at all.
And so it's a great experience then for him.
It is.
Now let me change gears a little bit. You've done a variety of major activities over your career, and how have you been called to them? And typically, how long have these commitments lasted?
I have tried to be open to the call in my life, and I don't know if I felt that it was God calling per se that led me down a path. I felt circumstances led me down some of the paths I went early in my life. My father was a physician, it was just kind of expected I'd fall into that path. I loved science, I loved math. It seemed a natural fit. I found out that I loved service in general, and so in addition to my work, I always had a component of service as well. And my faith was always important to me, and that kind of led me towards the seminary when I had a moment where I changed careers. But each little section of commitment to me has been approximately 10 years, in the sense that I try to give it my all. And I think that sometimes when you give it your all in any situation, you can experience, I don't want to say burnout because that seems like a negative term, but you reach a point at which you feel it's time to pass the baton. That you, if you really put your all into it, hopefully will give it all of the unique ideas that you have in store, and then can pass it on for someone else to take the reins and do something with it.
Right, right. Now, you had the medical background and you've had the chaplaincy background, and you're wearing a magnificent cross. I wonder if you could tell me about that.
I designed this cross with an artist who was on Vester Plaza.
Really?
At the jury type art show. This is about 5 years ago. Her name, am I allowed to say her name?
Please.
Okay, her name is Ivy Rose.
Okay.
Interesting story is when I was drawn to her work, most of her work is natural, things like butterflies and flowers, and she has every form of jewelry. It's a unique technique. It's not plique jour or cloisonné per se, but it's similar with some unique twists that she's devised. And she's been awarded pretty significant international awards for her work. I got started talking. I said, have you ever made a cross? And so we designed it together. And then she couldn't quite get it done for the next art fair. She said, well, I don't know. You know, I live in Michigan. I got to get it to you. I said, well, no problem. You know, I'm around the corner from where you're from. So it was a nice tie that she was actually a Michigan artist. I wear it 99% of the time. My faith is really important to me, and I have received more compliments on this than I think I've received on anything I've ever worn or done.
Right, right. Are there any significance to the colors or to the shapes?
Part of it is happy color. I've always been drawn to bright colors because I feel that if you are putting on your best, you act your best, you feel your best, you project your best. And so part of it is just happiness. And I wore it at work, and I tried always not to go in any way somber in the work scenario. I always wanted to come in with a smile, but also that my image projected a smile as well.
Right, and so that's an appropriate piece then for you now.
And it also was not, because I ministered to people of all faith bases or no formal religion.
Right.
This cross, I was in a Catholic hospital, a formerly Catholic hospital setting that still had a consecrated chapel, so there was a unique situation. There were, but I didn't want to offend anyone of non-Christian faith when I wore what I wore either.
Right. But that's part of who you are. And
correct.
That's could you tell me a little more about your faith journey and how you got to where you are?
I was a pre-Vatican II Catholic by just a couple years, raised by nuns initially in school. I also, though, had a very strong family faith base. My grandmother, who interestingly was from Erie, Pennsylvania, around the corner, was a victim of polio at age 2. And at age 12, her mother took her to the 3 shrines in Canada. They were a Polish family.
Where are the 3 shrines?
The 3 shrines in Canada are in Montreal, St. Joseph's Oratory, Captain Midland, a shrine to Our Lady, and then St. Anne de Beaupré and St. Anne de Beaupré.
Right.
Ideally, a Polish family would have gone to Our Lady of Częstochowa, but in those days, travel to Europe wasn't something that was in the cards.
Right.
So my grandmother sold the family cow in order to be able to take this trip. At the third shrine, they visited St. Anne de Beaupré. My grandmother left her crutches and braces at the shrine, and was a documented miracle. And I grew up with this story. I obviously wasn't present, don't know all of the details, but it impacted my life. I was taken on many of my grandmother's pilgrimages, which grew out of her commitment after she received this gift to bring people back to places of worship to thank God for the gift she'd been given. And initially she visited these shrines, and then I don't want to say business, because it was not a money-making operation. It was a labor of love.
It's a vocation.
It was a vocation that grew to include spots around the world. Europe and the Holy Land, and other.
So where have you traveled then?
I have traveled to Europe and to the Holy Land more than once. I've been blessed to do that. I have been to China, courtesy of one of my sons who studied there, and around the United States, of course.
Goodness. That's travel really forms your character, doesn't it? And it makes you very broad and open to others. I
think that's true. And I think it's important to expose yourself to many cultures, many faith bases, to keep yourself open. And I will point out that as many times as I've traveled, as long as I have made the effort to learn some polite words as best as I can speak them in the language in the country in which I travel to, that with a smile and a few nice words, you get along pretty much everywhere. It's the same language.
Certainly do. And people are very responsive to that. Now let me ask another question, sort of in our big exploration here. How do you recognize your faith callings among the scientific discipline? And to have had these two approaches is just, two substantial backgrounds, is just amazing.
I can actually remember the aha moment when I personally was imbued with the knowledge that the two could coexist, and definitely had to coexist. That, of course, with science, I had a lot of naysayers along the way, like it couldn't possibly at all, all has to do with evolution, and if you really carry it through, you just keep going further and further and further back. And my answer to that was, but there was a start. And there had to be something to give us that start. And also just faith was affecting me in ways in which there was no other explanation except that God was at work. Some people call it coincidence, some people call it happenstance. I called it touches of God. I recognize that in my life.
And do you share this with others in your chaplaincy? And
I do, if they're open to it. It's never my journey that's important when I enter a situation where I'm ministering, and that can be hospital, it can be on Bester Plaza, it can be over the phone, it can be during blessing and healing ministry. Wherever it happens, the most important thing is to listen and to be a caring listener. I am verbal. I will readily admit I am very verbal, but I also have the gift given to me that I am able to listen to others, and I believe that I show that I'm actively listening, and that people can sense that. Right.
Tell me a little more about the blessing and healing ministry.
About maybe 6 years ago now, 5-6 years ago, I was spending a little more time at Chautauqua, and I was approached by one of my fellow board members at the Catholic community, Jane McCarthy and Deacon Ed McCarthy, who were running the Blessing and Healing Ministry, and they asked if I would be interested in participating and sharing a day during the week with the deacon who is the host of the Catholic community. Initially Deacon Ray, and then it's split between Deacon Ray and Deacon Ron, but I am the steady 9-week on Tuesday blessing and healing facilitator, I guess I would call it. It's a very short service from 10:15 until everybody runs over to the amphitheater for lecture. We can have one person, we can have 20-some.
And where's the service held?
It's located in the Church of Christ Chapel, right there on the corner.
Got it.
And it's wonderful because we can hear the amp gearing up if we're running a little late.
Right.
But we have a reflection. We might start with a little music. Ray plays his guitar. There is some liturgy that has been passed down year to year to year. But then we have one point when one of us will take a reflection moment. And then we actually do an anointing with oil that's been blessed by our healing team at the beginning of the season. And just an interesting fact, we have a little bit of spikenard oil carrying the ministry of Mary Magdalene with the oil that she used to anoint Jesus. So,
tell me about that oil just a moment. I don't. That's a story I don't know.
Spikenard oil is not readily accessible in the United States, but in the Holy Land it is.
Okay.
And so, teeny tiny bottles will be brought back by the team, and we never seem to run out. And it has a very beautiful fragrance, and it is traditionally the oil that was used by Mary Magdalene to anoint Jesus' feet after her tears were employed first.
Do they obtain that in Magdal, or?
I'm sorry?
Do they obtain that in Magdal in Israel, or?
I'm not sure if there's a specific location or not.
Okay.
I don't know that.
I'll have to follow through on that. That's a great story. Now, let's go a little sort of back a little deeper. But often I suspect you will find some insights that may not quite fit together as a physician and as a practicing chaplain. How do you try to resolve them and reconcile?
Well, one of the ways I could take that question is the number of times I've been asked, why did this happen to me? Bad things happen to good people.
Indeed.
And why does our God allow that? And my faith tells me that it's a two-pronged thing. I can go to Jesus theology and be very deep and formal, but basically saying that we're reflecting the path of Jesus and suffering and having the good stuff too. Or I can say that God created this natural world, and in the natural world, there are things that happen that don't happen in the spiritual and heavenly world, and that it's difficult sometimes. I will say that I don't always have the answer, and sometimes just saying I'm sorry and being there to care is all you can do. I also have been at a pretty pivotal time in medicine in terms of the changing world of medicine.
Right.
From the time of the physician who had a small general practice, and your patients were not, they could be your friends, but it was more of a paternalistic approach to medicine. And for a lot of reasons, we've grown out of that. And there's good reason behind some of that. But at the time that I finished my career in medicine, I felt that I was getting to a point where, because of the business side of medicine, I was being asked to practice in an unethical manner. And I found that my switch to chaplaincy actually solved that problem for me, because it gave me the gift of time, the gift of the best part of medicine, which was to be present for the patient. And I found that at the end of my career in medicine, that was being taken away from me. I wasn't allowed to be present.
I have a very good physician friend, indicated that he made a change in his practice and was in a corporate big group, And they told him how many patients he had to see during a day and basically how much time it came out. And so if there was an adolescent or a young adult who may have been good health, but could have benefited from some health education and some good questioning, that didn't happen. It was just move along. And the old people who needed not just hand-holding, but some more detailed discussions didn't get it. And so he made a change for the similar sorts of reasons.
The verbiage, I can remember the last comment, which was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, was a comment that I would love for you to care for my wife and my children and my mom and my dad, but I don't have the luxury of your kind of care for the HMO patient. And if we didn't have the luxury of my kind of care for every patient, that was an untenable way for me to practice.
Right. And so you sense then it's time to make one of these major changes in your life.
I did.
You take the science forward with you, and you don't just discount it, but you take it forward, and it's there, but you weigh things that are appropriate. I have one major question I wanted. This is a change of gears, but it's something we talked about at the beginning. And that is, you had great success raising money in the annual fund during a challenging time for the institution with all the angst over the amphitheater reconstruction. And what advice would you offer others leading fundraising campaigns during difficult times?
I would say that you have to, if you accept, that you have to respect the team that is leading you. Because while Jeff and I did put forth the face of the fund, and we spent a number of hours, participating in events and being present and smiling, and hopefully getting to know quite a few people. That was one of the positive effects for us, as we met so many wonderful people. But the brunt of the work truly is done by the team in the development office. And you have to respect that behind the scenes, day in, day out, that they can't just leave after a year or 2 or 3, that they're going to be continuing through that difficult time and hopefully reaching a more positive time. And I'm sure it's kind of up and down always. But letting respecting your team, letting them lead you, but then doing the best job that you can do with kind of the framework that they give you.
Right.
I believed in approaching it very passionately and putting aside many other commitments at that time, trying to imbue it with my own unique touches and creating some new events or new pizzazz, if you want, and not feeling bad when some of the things you did weren't taken forward. That's the other part, is realizing that you're there for a limited period of time and just do the best that you can do during that time.
That's it. That's it. Cathy, we always like to let somebody talk. We only have a few minutes left. And usually people who are on here have some things they want to share. What do we need to add or consider? I
would like to share that I have been reflecting, particularly this year. I had a somewhat of a transitional year last year. I left the Catholic House Board and transitioned down the hill to the Chautauqua Women's Club. And it was a big growth year for me. It was something totally outside any of my experience at Chautauqua. I felt it was something that would help me to grow, and that it was something I should do.
Right.
But I had only played bridge in the club. I hadn't done much. I was blessed walking in the door the first time to run right into Barbara Vacker, who welcomed me with open arms. I was blessed also to work with a team that are of extraordinary women who have had extraordinary careers or are still pursuing those careers. But as property manager, I felt I was floundering. There was a big learning curve. Okay, good. I either quit or step up to the challenge. And so I decided that I made a commitment, I'm going to hang in there. And this year, I had an aha moment about a week ago where I woke up and I said, this little tiny subset of Chautauqua, the Chautauqua Women's Club, who owns this club? Who owns this building? Who owns these beautiful grounds right on the lake? And all of a sudden it hit me that I was part of a board that were the stewards, the trustees of this small part of Chautauqua, which provides great service and programming for the greater Chautauqua. And I thought, wow, what a gift. I said, yeah, there was a lot of responsibility, and it was a big learning curve last year. But it's truly a gift that we are allowed to be of service in this way. And so I think if you approach anything with a negative attitude, that's what's going to come out. If you approach it with a positive attitude of, look how much I've received by what I have given. And in fact, I always have believed that in giving, more is received, that it really is true, the line from St. Francis, that it is in giving that you do receive, because I'll be in some extraordinarily difficult situations, particularly in my ministry career, and I walk out and people are like, how can you do that? How can you watch people die? How can you listen to those stories and not just feel hate? And I am given a sense of peace by God. I firmly believe that, to be gifted to be able to be present with someone who's suffering, and to hopefully just be able to offer some comfort by listening. And so I hope that I'm continuing to challenge myself, and it's somewhat selfish, but I think it's okay that we're all a little bit selfish, because otherwise why would we do anything in life? And that seems a little different, but that's my philosophy.
Indeed, but indeed it does come from sharing, doesn't it?
It does.
The benefit to others. And I could punctuate some things from the Women's Club. Well, for one, I shoot videos. Didn't think anybody would take a video of a program which they offered on a Saturday at the end of the season, and had my students look at that as extra credit. They came back and said good things. And the number of views that are on YouTube, there must be some other big users of that, because the number's in the hundreds, and I have not had hundreds of students have been directed there.
And that program, excuse me, the program you're talking about is the only formal programming on the grounds on Saturday.
And it's usually fantastic.
Yeah.
Just terrific. Cathy, can you believe that we are out of time?
I'm very sorry.
What else? Anything else?
No, but thank you for having me.
By all means. And these guys always indulge me if we need to go over, but this has been great fun. Thank you for coming, and do come back.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate it.